to the representatives from the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority. I see you have circulated, we've got your opening statement here circulated. Would you like to speak to this or take it as read?
Good evening, Chair. So ordinarily I'm happy to table it. In fact, I am happy to table it, but there's a piece I just wanted to talk to very briefly, and I know you're behind,
Please.
but I will speak very briefly to it.
Right ahead.
And I think it's important because last time we appeared before the committee, there were a lot of questions, and a lot of questions we took on notice on Shield and First Guardian. So I just want to make clear, as a prudential regulator, APRA is responsible for ensuring that superannuation trustees adhere to the requirement of the SIS Act, so the law, and prudential standards relating to onboarding, ongoing due diligence and monitoring of investment options. It is the trustee's responsibility to determine whether or not options are suitable for them to offer and monitor against the rules that are set. Trustees, though, are only part of the chain of involvement in the Shield and First Guardian situation that APRA has the power to regulate. To be clear, APRA does not regulate and could not have regulated Shield and First Guardian, which were managed investment schemes subject to regulation by ASIC. We note that the way the Australian superannuation system is designed, members have the ability to exercise choice. Members may enter platform products for a variety of reasons, and these considerations are also beyond our regulatory remit. Over the past year, APRA has undertaken a substantial review of major platform trustees who collectively represent around 95% of funds under management for platform products. The scope of that review was broader than only First Guardian and Shield. The review identified weaknesses in the practices of some trustees, such as onboarding practices, the monitoring of investment options, and remedial action where member outcomes are not being achieved. APRA required trustees to review their practices, address weaknesses, and report breaches of the prudential standards to us as a matter of urgency. APRA also undertook individual assessments of trustees. As a result of this, APRA took strong enforcement action to hold trustees to account for breaches of APRA standards or poor practices. In December last year, APRA accepted a court-enforceable undertaking from Net Wealth and imposed licence conditions on Diversa trustees and equity trustees to address investment governance-related concerns. There are a number of actions ASIC has taken against trustees which are now before the courts, and the outcomes and the facts about what happened will take some time to be determined. Finally, APRA continues to coordinate closely with ASIC on the regulatory response to the unacceptable community outcomes resulting from the collapses of these schemes, and the actions already taken are not necessarily the end of APRA's enforcement response. With that, Chair, I'm very happy, the members and I, to take questions from the committee.
Thank you. First, Senator Canavan. Sharma.
Do you want to go?
Yeah, if that's right. Thanks for your opening statement, Mr. Lonsdale, and sorry we're late getting to you tonight. I just want to, I'm relatively new to this sector, so just forgive my simple questions, but as I understand it, part of APRA's role, or maybe more than part of APRA's role, is prudential regulation of registrable superannuation entities, RSCs.
Yes.
That's the same as this language you use. Is it superannuation trustees in your
Yes.
in your scheme? So that when you oversee around 56 superannuation trustees, that's
correct.
An RSC licensee, same thing. Okay. And is it part of your mandate to examine or concern yourself with related party arrangements, potential conflicts of interest within these RSC licensees?
Well, I might ask Ms Cole. We have rules around that.
Yes,
okay.
We have a standard on conflicts of interest, Senator, and we, as you know, our primary role is to, as a supervision agency, we have supervision relationships, therefore, with all the entities that are within our regulation. So in super there is a conflicts standard. My colleagues will remind me of the number of it if that matters, but that requires super trustees to have policies and procedures around conflicts management.
Right, okay. Okay, that's helpful. And there was one in particular I was interested in. I noticed you covered in your opening statement, Diversa trustees, because I have heard industry concerns expressed to me about related party transactions, inflation of fees, misuse of members' funds, allegations, I admit, but I noticed you've taken, you mentioned in your opening statement here you took in imposed licence conditions, is that right?
Correct.
On Diversa trustees?
Yeah.
Why were they imposed? What was that in response to? What were the concerns with Diversa trustees that led you to impose licence conditions?
So we had done a significant amount of work in relation to platform trustees, which we heralded in our 24-25 corporate plan. And as the Chair mentioned in his opening statement, in that work we gathered in a great deal of information, and we put out a public letter to industry expressing concerns generically, or the sort of concerns we had about onboarding, monitoring, remediating issues. Because we had done that work, that gave us insight into a portion of the trustees operating the platform models where we felt we needed to push in and do more work with individual trustees. And as a result of that, in December last year, we imposed some licence conditions on actually 3 of the trustees. One was Diversa. You remember last time, Senator, you might remember you asked questions and we had to be a bit coy about what we were saying.
Yeah, I do remember
because
that.
we were in the period.
None the wiser
Yes,
after
we
our
were in the
last
period
discussion.
where we were giving justice. You know, we were giving the opportunity to parties to say
Yes,
anything they wanted to say, but that culminated in licence conditions and court enforceable undertakings towards the end of last year to require trustees to address areas of concern in you know, we can give you far more detail if you would like to have that, because my colleagues here I think have it written down in front of them, so we can give you more about the licence conditions if you'd like.
Well, yeah, look, a little bit, and probably most interest though, what's the flavour of the areas of concern that caused you to impose those licence conditions? So it doesn't need to be chapter and verse, but a sort of thematic account. If you
colleagues to my left who would like to address this?
I'm happy to answer that. So the sort of issues that we pushed into with the trustees were around the diligence with which they were onboarding investment options onto their platforms.
Okay.
The ongoing monitoring processes that they had in place to monitor whether those options were performing as expected, the management of conflicts of interest, and what they would do to remediate the situation if an option was no longer seen as appropriate for their members. I'm happy to talk a little bit about what the licence conditions we imposed on Diversa required.
Just before you get to that, so I'd heard specifically about Diversa debiting members to cover additional fees that it was charging at its own discretion. Was that brought to your attention? Was that an area that you noticed in your investigation?
Not sure I heard your question.
Sorry, yeah, I believe, and I might not be using the terminology correctly, but Diversa debiting members to cover additional fees that it was charging at its own discretion. So Diversa was billing members for services it provided without disclosing, I mean, it was sort of self-dealing.
I don't think that was one of the issues that we were aware of or were covering in those licence conditions. We'd have to go back to that. So if you have further information you'd like to give us, we'll look into that.
Okay, all right. As part of the sort of investigations, I mean, do you speak to the sub-funds, the platform products for these RSC licensees?
So the way we approached this matter was to request information using our information gathering powers and assess that information against our standards to see whether or not they were up to our required standards. So it was more engagement with the entity itself and gathering information from the entity itself rather than the underlying products.
I see. Okay.
But perhaps it might be helpful to talk about what we are doing under the licence
Yeah,
conditions.
please. I was
think
going to
that
ask you
perhaps helps to address this.
to go to that now. Thank you.
Under the licence conditions, Diversa and the other trustees required to appoint an independent expert to conduct a review of the high-risk products on their platforms, review their investment governance frameworks. So I would expect that review would look into a whole range of issues around how the frameworks are being operationalised. They then need to develop and implement a plan to address any recommendations that the independent expert makes, provide assurance to APRA that the actions under the plan are complete and effective to address our concerns. They need to do a review of their platform investment menu for certain products to make sure that those products have ongoing suitability, and they're required to refrain from onboarding new high-risk investment options to the platform until the independent expert verifies that. So there is a whole range of things that they need to do to address the sort of concerns you're raising.
And they remain subject to a more intensive regime of supervision whilst those conditions are in place?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Senator, can I make one contextual point? Because I hope it's helpful, because we've been talking a lot about products. So just to let you know the level that we're operating in. So the review that Ms. Cole talked about on platforms covered 95% of the platform products. There's around 17,000 of them on the platforms. So what we're not doing is examining each one of those
Each
products.
of the products on the platforms,
Right.
yeah.
So what we do though is set rules, as Mr. Colhagen said, on how those products are onboarded, the monitoring that needs to happen, and how they're offboarded. So we are in the rule setting space, and we expect trustees to adhere to those rules. And so when we're taking enforcement action, what we found is trustees are not at the level that we need them to be at for the rules.
Understood. Thank you. Ms. Cole, I might take up on that offer of providing further information once I get a little more detail. I'll write to you separately.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was all for me, Chair.
Just a couple of questions.